Many years ago, I called this phenomenon the stuck twin phenomenon, and son of a gun if the name didn't stick. Here we have a single placental mass, and here we have the one fetus is at the bottom of the amniotic fluid pool where it belongs. But here we have a fetus that's at the top of the amniotic fluid pool. Well, I can assure you of two things that were going on the day that I took this picture. Thing one is that gravity was working, and thing two is that fetuses cannot tread water. So this fetus is not swimming along the top of the amniotic fluid pool. It's stuck there. And you can actually see that because the membrane is pushed up against the abdominal wall of the fetus, and it's not being snug, gently cradled by the membrane. It's pushed up there sufficiently hard that it actually indents the placenta. So this fetus is being suspended by its membrane, ergo the membrane is present. So when you see a stuck twin, what you're really saying is that this proves diamnionicity. Now, the other thing that you should say to yourself is that this is most often seen in the twin transfusion syndrome. So much so that if you see a stuck twin and you do not diagnose the twin transfusion syndrome, you better have a really good, astoundingly good reason for not doing that, because it is almost always the stuck twin phenomenon. The twin transfusion syndrome. Another term that has come along, I like the term, I like descriptive terms like stuck twin, and I like the term shrink-wrapped twin. Okay, what that is saying is that here what you can see is the membrane has come down, it goes along the edge of the cord, meets the membrane on the opposite side, which also went along the edge of the cord, formed a mesentery of the two membranes, specularly reflecting here, not specularly reflecting there, and then disappeared as it went around the fetus, shrink-wrapped. Now, here you can see there's a little bit of fluid, but you can see the membrane go and disappear as it shrink-wraps around the twin. Now, I like it because it's so descriptive, right? Look here, you can see it literally is shrink-wrapping the extremity of the fetus. Here, it shrink-wraps around the extremity, then shrink-wraps the fetus, pushes it against the placental margin there. Very excellent term, shrink-wrapped twin. Again, virtually certain you're looking at a diamniotic pregnancy. Virtually certain that you're looking at a monochorionic diamniotic pregnancy. Virtually certain that you're looking at a monochorionic diamniotic pregnancy afflicted with the twin transfusion syndrome. We're not there yet, but we'll talk much more about the twin transfusion syndrome in the second lecture. Now, one of the things I want to warn you about in this issue of the shrink-wrapped twin is that as soon as you say a word like shrink-wrapped, you start to think of, the stuff you pick up at Safeway, where the thing is shrink-wrapped, and you think, wow, that's really nice. Look at how beautifully that's shrunk around this package I'm holding. So we tend to think of shrink-wrapping of the twin like this, which almost never happens. I won't say it never happens, but by the time the twin gets shrink-wrapped, usually by then there was a lot more amnion than fetus. So because it can't nicely snug around the fetus, it gets thrown into folds. It's usually not that one. This is more likely to happen. So it's very common to see these folds of membrane sitting out there in the amniotic fluid. Fold of membrane flip-flopping around out there in the amniotic fluid. Why? Because there was more membrane than was necessary to start shrink-wrapping this twin. Now, word to the wise, this can lead to serious errors, all right? If a plane of section is taken through the fold, then you think that this is the fluid from one twin and this is the fluid from the other twin. So you see a good pocket of fluid here and a good pocket of fluid here, and you think that the fluid is basically equal between the sacs, but nothing could be further from the truth. This fetus has a lot of fluid and this fetus only has a very little bit of fluid. Now, I would say that my sonographers have one of the largest experiences in the country looking at twin pregnancies. They know all about the shrink-wrapped twin. They know all about the folded membrane. And every year, I will see this mistake made by highly experienced sonographers who know all about shrink wrapping and all about folded membrane and all about not making this mistake. This is not a trivial thing. Very good people can be fooled by this membrane folding business. So keep it in mind, always in the back of your mind. Don't be fooled by this. Okay. So what is the problem with sharing a placenta? Is it that there aren't enough chorionic villi to go around? Well, sometimes that is true, but it's usually not what the problem is. The problem is vascular connections between the fetuses. So here you see blood vessels that went from one fetus to the other. That's not good, okay? Vascular communication in monochorionic pregnancies is virtually 100%. If you know it to be monochorionic, you can say to yourself, there will be vascular connections. On the other side of the coin, if you know it to be dichorionic, whether it's separate or fused, although there are some questions about vessel crossings in fused placentas, but for all intents and purposes, if you know it to be dichorionic, you may assume that there are no vascular communications. If you know it to be monochorionic, you must assume that there are vascular communications. It is these vascular communications that make these syndromes that we worry so much about possible. The twin transfusion syndrome, the twin embolization syndrome, it goes by a variety of names, the acardiac twin or trap syndrome. They're all made possible and in fact defined by the vascular connection. So while twin transfusion syndrome can have a variety of connections, it's the artery to vein connection that is the culprit. In order to have an acardiac twin or the so-called trap syndrome, we'll talk much more about this later, you must have an artery to artery connection and you must have a vein to vein connection. Otherwise, there's absolutely no possibility of this syndrome existing. In the twin embolization syndrome, the major culprit is the artery to artery connection. Now, these connections are common, as I said, 100%, pretty much. Obviously, whenever you say 100%, there will be exceptions, but they're unusual and rare, in my opinion. Arteriovenous are clearly the most common. 95% of monochorionic pregnancies will demonstrate at least one AV connection. Arterial connections 75% of the time. The rarest is the venous connection, only 5% of the time. So you can appreciate that by adding these up. Obviously, more than one connection is likely to occur in any given placenta. If you want to understand twin syndromes, you must understand the placental anatomy. I know you're sitting there thinking, Dr. Philly, I don't need to understand placental anatomy. But let me assure you, it's not hard. And these notions will help you